Hey there. Tonight, we're going somewhere soft, somewhere quiet, rhythmic, and laced with silk threads and ink stains. It's the Qing Dynasty, not a palace, not a battlefield, not a festival. You're in a weaving mill, not weaving, not watching. You're the one who records every bolt, every thread, every silent hour. You listen to looms the way others listen to bells. The work is slow, precise, invisible, and that's the point. Forget the golden robes and dragon thrones for now. This is what it was really like to be a recorder in Imperial China, one careful stroke of the brush at a time. Now, before we begin, go ahead and settle in, dim your screen. Maybe pull a blanket a little closer, or turn on something soft to blur the edges of the room. And if you haven't yet, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these slow, sleepy journeys through the past. While you're here, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? It's always lovely to see who's joining me from across the world. Sometimes right at the edge of sleep, so let's begin. Imagine yourself rising in the faint blue light before dawn. The air is cool, still damp from the night's mist. Your sleeping mat rests on worn floorboards. The walls of your room are plain wood, and a small paper screen lets in a sliver of sky barely enough to dress by. You wash your face with cold water from a basin. The splash is sharp but familiar. Your robe, folded neatly the night before, is simple, dyed with plant-based indigo, not costly but clean. A quiet sign of discipline, of someone who notices details. You gather your tools, a slim ledger wrapped in cloth, 2 brushes, one slightly frayed, one still sharp and inkstone, smooth and dark like still water, and a small pouch of ground ink. Today is like every day, and that's exactly how it should be. The silk mill sits just beyond the edge of town. Its courtyard is quiet when you arrive, save for the soft creak of the gates. Inside, a maze of looms fills the long hall. Dozens of wooden frames arranged like rows of bones, each one tended by a silent, focused weaver. The looms speak in their own way, the steady clack of the shuttle sliding through, the gentle knock of wood striking wood. 1,000 tiny rhythms all overlapping, but somehow not clashing. It's not music, but it has a tempo. And you've learned to follow it. You step lightly. No one looks up as you pass. The workers are already busy. Most of them women, heads covered with cotton cloth, bodies swaying slightly as they guide threads through the loom. Your station is a low desk near the center, close enough to observe, far enough not to distract. You unroll your ledger and dip your brush into the thick black ink, then begin the work of watching. You don't speak. Words are unnecessary here. You count bolts completed. You log the length and weight of each. You note the bundles of raw silk delivered from the storeroom and the ones returned for inspection. There's no room for guessing. The numbers must be exact. You double-check quietly. And when something seems off, you check again. A small bell rings mid-morning, a break, but only for the weavers. You remain at your desk, stretching your fingers, pausing to refill the ink. Sometimes you glance up. You've learned to recognize the personalities of the loom's keepers, not by their words, but by the way they move. There's the younger woman at the far end who always begins too quickly. Her threads pull unevenly, and her bundles arrive thinner than expected. You log that without judgment, just the facts. There's the older man with rough hands, his shuttle moving in calm, deliberate strokes. Every bolt he finishes is nearly perfect. You make note of that too. You begin to feel as though you know them, and yet you don't even know most of their names. At noon, your meal is plain. Steamed rice, salted vegetables, a wedge of preserved bean curd. You eat slowly, sitting on a low stone bench near the wall. The sound of looms continues inside. They never fully stop. You watch the clouds for a moment, soft gray shapes moving across the sky. It is perhaps the only free time you'll have today, but even rest is part of the record. The afternoon brings a shift in the light. Golden rays begin to filter in through the slats of the wooden walls. The shadows stretch longer, cooler. You check your figures again. You carefully compare the morning logs to the afternoon's pace. And when the overseer walks by, robes rustling faintly, you bow slightly and hand him the day's first set of figures. He does not speak. He simply takes the scroll, nods once, and moves on. You exhale slowly. No corrections were requested. You've done your part. As dusk nears, the sounds begin to fade. The looms slow. The voices soften. Bundles are tied. Tools are cleaned. You remain a little longer, transcribing your notes into the final ledger. Your brush moving in slow, smooth curves. You write by lantern light now. The warm glow illuminating the page, casting long shadows across your hands. Each entry is the same as yesterday's, and tomorrow's will likely be the same again. But that, too, is part of the rhythm. Not everyone notices the recorders. But without the numbers, there would be no silk, no robes for the emperor, no trade for silver, no wealth for the court. You close the ledger, wrap the cloth around it, and place it gently in your satchel. Outside, the moon is rising, pale and watchful. The path home is quiet, and your day has ended. Now, let us leave the hum of the silk mill behind and wander instead through the long, hushed corridors of power. It is the early 18th century. The air inside the Forbidden City is heavy with stillness, broken only by the soft sweep of slippers across polished stone and the rustle of robes against carved wooden screens. Behind one of many closed doors, a lamp flickers quietly beside a stack of handwritten scrolls. Here sits a man tired, thin, and focused. His name is Yongzheng, but history knows him as the Yongzheng Emperor. Unlike the rulers who came before or after him, Yongzheng is not remembered for opulence or spectacle. He did not build vast palaces or leave behind volumes of poetry. His greatness lies elsewhere. In the quiet, methodical way he reshaped an empire. He came to the throne in 1723. After the death of his father, the long-reigning Qing Emperor, the transition of power was not smooth. Even today, there are murmurs of mystery, of missing documents, of contested succession, of brothers quietly exiled. But none of that ever mattered to him as much as what came next, the work. Yongzheng was a ruler who worked more than he ruled. He rose before the sun, reviewing reports and writing notes in his own hand, sometimes scribbled in the margins of memorials, sometimes in sharp red ink that left no room for misinterpretation. His script was elegant, controlled, with no wasted strokes, just like his role. His advisors rarely saw him idle. While others dreamed of power, Yongzheng measured it in tasks completed, accounts reconciled, systems refined. His reforms were not grand gestures, but meticulous recalibrations. He restructured the tax system to reduce corruption, made civil service appointments more merit-based, and poured resources into ensuring that granaries were well stocked, even in lean years. These decisions were not flashy, but they meant something, especially to the farmers whose rice no longer vanished into the pockets of dishonest officials, or to the families who no longer feared the price of salt would double overnight. And yet, there was a shadow to his precision. His rule was solitary and increasingly secretive. He established a private memorial system, an invisible channel where provincial governors could send confidential messages directly to the throne. It allowed him to bypass traditional bureaucracy, but it also meant he could keep an eye on everyone. Even his most loyal ministers never truly knew how closely they were being watched. The weight of his responsibility, and perhaps his suspicion, seemed to press inward. Portraits from later in his life show a man with narrow shoulders, sharp eyes, and a face carved with fatigue. Loneliness became a companion. Within the endless courtyards of the imperial palace, he trusted few and confided in fewer. He was said to read until his candle burned low, often falling asleep at his desk surrounded by open scrolls. Servants learned not to disturb him. His chambers were quiet not because they were peaceful, but because they were heavy, thick with the scent of ink, paper, and the burden of ruling a vast empire alone. Even his personal life was ruled by restraint, unlike emperors famed for indulgence. Yongzheng kept his household tightly controlled. He rarely visited his consorts and discouraged extravagance among his children. His court was known less for revelry than for stillness decorum without warmth. But perhaps the greatest irony of his life is this. For a man who worked so relentlessly to keep China stable, his legacy was overshadowed. His father, Kang Ji, is remembered as a wise sage, his son, Qianlong, as a patron of the arts. But Yongzheng, he remains, in the minds of many, a blank space between two celebrated reigns. Yet, history has begun to remember. Scholars sifting through archives have uncovered the depth of his reforms, the efficiency of his administration, and the clarity of his vision. Without his tireless groundwork, the prosperity of Qianlong's golden age might never have come. In 1735, after 12 years on the throne, Yongzheng died quietly. Some say from illness. Others whisper darker tales. There was no extravagant farewell, no grand tomb unveiled to crowds of mourners. He left no final poem or speech, just a smooth transition of power, a functioning government, and tens of thousands of brush-written notes that bore witness to his sleepless devotion. His brilliance was not the kind that caught the eye. It was the kind that kept a nation running, one signature at a time, and perhaps in the quiet spaces of history, in the ink-dusted corners of an emperor's study, we can still hear the scratch of his brush, steady and sure, long after the candle has gone out. Let's move now from scrolls and candlelight to something softer, more delicate, and yet no less important in rhythm of Qing Dynasty life, color, or rather, the creation of it. Imagine, if you will, a small courtyard tucked behind the outer walls of a dyeing workshop. You are standing among bundles of white silk, smooth and weightless in your arms, and around you, wooden vats, steam rising gently into the morning air, and the gentle burble of water infused with bark, roots, and minerals. This is where silk becomes more than fabric. This is where it learns to speak. The secrets of Chinese silk dyeing were ancient, passed down not in books, but in memory. Recipes that were rarely written down and never shared freely to the outsider. The process may have looked like little more than boiling, soaking, and drying. But to the dye masters, it was an art of precision. Temperature, humidity, even the time of year, each played a role. The same recipe in different hands, or on a different day, might yield something completely different. Take indigo, for example, the most common and humble of dye plants, yet in practiced hands, capable of creating an astonishing depth of blue. The process began with fermentation. Indigo leaves were soaked in large vats, left to rot just enough. The mixture stirred slowly with long wooden paddles. When it was ready, the silk was lowered and, at first, the cloth came out a sickly green. But once touched by air, oxygen did its quiet work, and the green transformed into a rich, solemn blue. Multiple dips deepened the color, but too many, and the silk might weaken. You had to know when to stop. When enough was enough, then there was red. In the north, they used madder root. Its fibers ground and soaked until the liquid ran rust-colored. In the south, safflower and sapanwood were favored, yielding pinks and vibrant scarlets. But the most prized reds came from cochineal, tiny insects harvested and dried, imported at great cost. The resulting dye produced crimson so vivid it seemed to glow, but it was unstable, sensitive to light and moisture. Still, it was used in court garments, wedding robes, and temple banners. Its impermanence didn't make it less valuable, only more rare. But of all the colors, none held more weight than yellow. Not just any yellow, but the imperial yellow. A soft golden hue, warm and dignified, reserved strictly for the emperor and his immediate household. It was forbidden for others to wear it. The dye was made from gardenia pods, sometimes with additions like turmeric or pagoda tree flowers. Each ingredient measured with a scholar's care. The mixture was watched constantly overcooked and it dulled, understirred and it failed to fix to the silk. Only those with the steadiest of hands and sharpest of eyes could be trusted to prepare it, but the dyeing process didn't end with immersion. After soaking, the silk had to be hung, rinsed, dried, and checked. Again and again. The threads were sometimes painted or printed with additional motifs using carved wooden blocks. Dragons, phoenixes, clouds, lotus flowers. Every design had meaning. Nothing was decorative for decoration's sake. A specific flower might bless fertility. A particular wave pattern could signal longevity. Even the placement of motifs had rules. Centered, balanced, aligned to the wearer's status. In the dye yards, work was both communal and solitary. Young apprentices swept the floors and fetched water. Elder artisans whispered over swatches of silk, adjusting the color by eye. Never by formula. There were no shortcuts. If a red silk was meant for a marriage ceremony, it had to be exactly the right shade. If a court robe was too dark, or the hue too weak, it would be rejected. Sometimes burned, silk was precious, but so was symbolism. You might think, standing among the dye vats, that the world of color was limited to a palette of blue, red, yellow. But the combinations were endless. Blues mixed with blacks to create stormy twilight tones. Yellows soft with gray to mimic misty dawns. There were dusky greens, rose golds, smoky purples, all made with natural ingredients, coaxed gently from plants and minerals with slow heat and long patience. No neon, no synthetic brights, just earth, water, fire, and time. Even the final step, fixing the dye required skill. Alum, lime, or even animal urine was used to help the color set. If done correctly, the fabric would hold its hue for decades. If not, it would bleed in the first rain. Generations of dyers knew how to test this. They would wrap the silk around a smooth stone, then place it in a bamboo steamer and watch. If no color ran, it was ready. If it did, the work began again. Today, modern chemists study these ancient methods with reverence. Some of the dye recipes have been lost entirely. Others are known, but impossible to replicate with modern tools. Too much intuition, too much feeling, too much quiet human care. And so, when we see surviving robes in museums, still vivid after centuries, we are not just seeing silk. We are seeing the memory of those who touched it, dyed it, whispered over it, of men and women who understood color not as science, but as soul. Because in the Qing Dynasty, color was never just decoration. It was identity, status, ceremony. And for those who worked behind the scenes, those whose hands were stained with dye, it was devotion, quiet, patient, not precise. Like a breath held just long enough to turn white silk into meaning. Let's walk now, gently and unhurriedly, into a quieter corner of the Forbidden City, past the tall red walls and golden tiled roofs, past the ceremonial courtyards echoing with the steps of guards and eunuchs. We're heading somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, a place without titles, but not without order. You are entering the tailor court, where silk became power, and thread carried meaning far beyond words. Imagine it's early morning. The sun hasn't yet crested the curved roofs of the inner court. You slip through a narrow side gate. A worn wooden door just barely cracked open. Inside, it smells faintly of steam, aged wood, and something warm. Maybe a hint of rice porridge from someone's breakfast wrapped in cloth. The courtyard is swept clean. No footsteps yet, no raised voices. Just the soft shuffle of a broom and the muted click of a loom being tested in the distance. You aren't here to issue orders or receive robes. You are one of dozens of women and a few men who dedicate their lives to a task most outside will never see: tailoring. In the Forbidden City was not merely sewing. It was a ritual of silence and precision, passed through generations like a secret. You work inside low halls, warmed in winter by coal braziers tucked beneath the benches. Long tables line the rooms, each one home to a different part of a garment's journey, from measuring to dyeing, cutting to embroidery. Each step is done by hand. Every person knows only their part. No one rushes today. You're helping embroider a dragon robe for a mid-level prince. Not the emperor. His would be made by senior artisans only, but this robe still matters. It carries rank, influence. Ceremony. The base fabric is a deep blue silk satin, thick but fluid. You've spent the last several weeks drawing out cloud motifs in pale ink. Now, with a needle thin as a hair and threads dyed with indigo, madder root, and golden safflower, you begin to lay each line. Small, even stitches that shimmer in the light when the robe is turned. This robe alone might take 3 months. Longer if the weather turns and the dyeing slows. The embroidery includes 5-clawed dragons, symbols of power, but placed lower, less prominently, to show the prince's rank. Each claw must be symmetrical, each flame surrounding the dragon measured with wooden templates. You don't guess. You don't improvise. There is no almost right, only correct. A single mistake could mean starting over. By midday, the room is brighter. Shafts of light filter through the lattice windows, illuminating motes of dust that drift like snow. No one speaks much, a few murmured corrections. A sharp intake of breath when someone's needle snags the silk. But otherwise, it's just the rhythm of work, the click of scissors, the rustle of fabric, the quiet hum of concentration nearby. Another woman is working on the lining. You glance over and see she's sewing in a strip of pale rabbit fur. It's for warmth. The robe will be worn during late winter ceremonies. The fur is hidden, never seen by the court. But still, it must be perfect. The emperor himself might walk past and see a crease, a seam, an uneven hem. And perfection is expected always, occasionally. A eunuch from the Bureau of Rights might come to check on progress. He won't praise or smile. He will simply record what stage each garment is at, note who is working on what, and leave. If he frowns, well, you'll hear about it after he's gone. Perhaps the robe will be delayed. Perhaps it will be redone. Or perhaps, worst of all, your name will be quietly removed from the records, reassigned to simpler tasks, mending instead of making. And yet, despite the pressure, there is something comforting in this place. The routine, the slowness, the certainty. You know where your hands should be. You know what your thread should do. Every morning begins the same. Every robe must pass the same tests. The rules do not change. And in a world as layered and dangerous as the imperial court, that constancy, that stillness, is a rare kind of peace. As the day ends, the light fades again, turning the silk darker, richer. You wrap your tools in soft cloth, fold the robe carefully, never creasing the embroidery. A supervisor collects it, wordless. She checks the stitches with a single glance, nods. You exhale. It will be placed in a cedar-lined chest until tomorrow, or the next day, or the next. Outside, lanterns are being lit. The palace begins its evening rhythm. Servants hurrying along corridors, officials in long robes passing under painted gates. But here, in the tailor court, things remain quiet. The work is not yet done. In another room, someone begins another robe. Somewhere else, old silk is being unpicked, thread salvaged for reuse. Nothing is wasted. Not time, not effort. Years from now, when the robe you stitched is worn during a wedding or a funeral or an ancestral rite, no one will know your name, but they will bow before the garment. They will read its dragons and waves and clouds like text. And in that moment, your work, your silence, will speak for you. And now we return to stillness. You've wandered gently through a world long faded, through soft halls and faded dyes, where every thread told a story no one would read aloud. You've listened to silence as it was once lived, in the counting of cloth, the rise of breathless emperors, the deep mysteries hidden in color and code, and the quiet hierarchy behind palace doors. What you heard tonight was never meant to dazzle or startle. It was simply meant to be remembered, slowly, softly, as if you'd been there watching with quiet eyes, never needing to speak. Perhaps you can still feel it now. The faint scent of steamed rice and fresh dyed silk. The way the floor creaked beneath padded slippers. The slow rhythm of someone breathing beside a low fire, bent over embroidery that might never bear their name. It's in that rhythm that we rest. History is often told through its kings, its battles, its noise. But sometimes the deeper truths hide in the hush, in the labor of those who never shouted, in the touch of a calloused hand smoothing fabric, in the dip of a brush, in the moment before a robe is folded and sent into the dark. And now the story quiets. You don't need to do anything else. There's nothing left to follow, nothing left to understand. Just allow yourself to drift, to soften, to let the edges of your thoughts fade like lantern light at the end of a corridor. From here on, the world of words slips away. The fire is still burning soft and low. You'll hear the gentle crackle of wood, the faint whisper of warmth, a sound that doesn't ask for anything, only that you rest near it. You can stay as long as you like. You're not expected to listen or even stay awake. Let that sound be a comfort. Let it blur the boundary between this night and the ones long past. Let your breath follow the slow rise and fall of a story that doesn't need an ending. Wherever you are, whenever you are, know that you're not alone. There's a small light burning in the quiet, and it's just for you. Sleep well, sleep deeply. Good night.